March 15, 2024. Arnold Vasquez had been selling surfboards and beach gear for 18 years. Clean record, quiet life. That's exactly why no one expected what happened when 3 kids tried to rob him at 9:47 p.m. The first attacker went down in 4 seconds, disarmed, throat crushed. The second lasted 6 seconds before Arnold snapped his neck with movements too precise for a beach shop owner. The third kid was still breathing when the cops arrived, still wearing the pendant that changed everything. What happened in the next 3 days became the most investigated case in Venice Beach history. The FBI opened cold case files because of it, and for 30 years, when people talked about the Civil War in El Salvador, they always came back to one name, the name Arnold Vasquez had been running from, the name that proved you can't escape what you've done to children. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The pendant caught the fluorescent light as the paramedic worked over the third kid's chest. Arnold stood 20 feet away, hands zip-tied behind his back, watching LAPD Detective Maria Santos crouch beside the dying boy. She was speaking in Spanish, her voice gentle despite the chaos of sirens and crime scene tape. Arnold's throat went dry. He knew that pendant, knew the intricate silver cross with the serpent wrapped around its base, had seen it hanging from smaller necks in a village whose name he'd tried to forget for 3 decades. "Sir, I need you to focus." The uniformed officer beside him was young, probably 25, badge read Martinez. "Can you walk me through what happened one more time?" Arnold forced his eyes away from the pendant. The story came out clean, rehearsed from 18 years of preparing for this moment. 3 kids entered just before closing. The tall one, now sprawled near the register with his neck twisted at an impossible angle, demanded cash. The stocky one by the door, throat crushed, died before the ambulance arrived, had a gun. Arnold acted in self-defense. What he didn't tell Officer Martinez was how the muscle memory felt like coming home. How his hands remembered exactly where to strike, how much pressure to apply, how to kill efficiently and quietly. Skills you don't learn from selling surfboards. Detective Santos stood up from the third kid. Even from across the shop, Arnold could see the boy had stopped breathing. She pulled off her latex gloves and walked toward him, her dark eyes studying his face with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Mr. Vasquez." Her accent was slight but unmistakable. Los Angeles born, but Spanish was her first language. "I'm Detective Santos. We're going to need you to come downtown, answer some questions." "Am I under arrest?" "Should you be?" The question hung in the salt air between them. Through the shop's front window, Arnold could see the crowd of onlookers growing. Venice Beach at night drew its share of tourists and locals, but a triple homicide was rare enough to pull them from the bars and late-night taco stands. 3 young men are dead, Detective Santos continued. "You don't have a scratch on you. That's unusual." Arnold kept his expression neutral. "I got lucky." Lucky. She wrote something in her notebook. "How long have you owned this place?" 18 years. "Before that?" "Construction work. Nothing steady." "Family?" "My wife died 12 years ago. Cancer." Detective Santos nodded, still writing. Arnold noticed her hands, steady, controlled, cop hands. But there was something else in her movements, a precision that reminded him of other dangerous people he'd known. "The gun," she said. "The one the first victim was carrying. You ever see it before?" Arnold's chest tightened. He'd glimpsed the weapon when he'd disarmed the stocky kid, a Browning high power, the same model the Salvadoran death squads had used. The same model Arnold had carried for 6 years before he fled to Los Angeles with a new name and a promise to God that he'd never kill again. No. Never seen it. Interesting serial number on it. Starts with 245. Those are Salvadoran military issue from the 80s. The words hit Arnold like ice water. Detective Santos was watching his face carefully now, looking for tells. He'd gotten good at hiding them, but 30 years of selling beach gear to tourists hadn't prepared him for this level of scrutiny. "I wouldn't know anything about that." "Of course not." She closed her notebook. "Officer Martinez is going to transport you downtown. We'll get your statement, maybe have you talk to someone about the trauma. 3 deaths, even in self-defense, that's heavy." As Martinez guided him toward the patrol car, Arnold caught sight of Detective Santos again. She was back beside the bodies, photographing the pendant with her phone. The silver cross gleamed under the camera flash, and for a moment Arnold was back in El Salvador, 1993, watching village children lined up against a church wall. The pendant had belonged to a girl named Carmen Restrepo, 7 years old. Arnold remembered because she'd been the last one that day, and she'd looked him in the eyes before he pulled the trigger. Her mother had been sobbing in the dirt, begging in Spanish for her daughter's life. Arnold had killed the mother too. Now someone was wearing Carmen's pendant on Venice Beach, 30 years later. Someone had found him, sent these kids with a gun from his past and a piece of jewelry from his nightmares. As the patrol car pulled away from his shop, Arnold watched Detective Santos in the side mirror. She was still photographing the scene, but her movements were too deliberate, too focused, like someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. The hunt had found him. The fluorescent lights of the LAPD interrogation room buzzed like dying insects. Arnold sat across from Detective Santos, his hands folded on the metal table between them, and tried to forget the weight of Carmen Restrepo's pendant around a dead boy's neck. The room smelled of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant, but underneath it all was something else, the metallic scent of fear that seemed to follow him wherever he went. "Coffee?" Detective Santos asked, settling into her chair with a file folder thick enough to contain a life's worth of secrets. Black. She poured from a thermos, her movements economical and precise. Arnold had known women like her before, dangerous ones who hid steel behind soft voices and careful smiles. The coffee was bitter, probably hours old, but it gave him something to do with his hands while she studied him. "Tell me about your wife," she said, opening the folder. The request caught him off guard. Arnold had expected questions about the fight, about his past, about how a 58-year-old shop owner had killed 3 armed men without breaking a sweat. Instead, Detective Santos was looking at a photograph, Maria Elena at their wedding 18 years ago, her smile bright enough to erase the shadows that followed him from El Salvador. "Her name was Maria Elena," he said carefully. She was good. Cancer, you said. Ovarian. Took 2 years. Arnold's voice caught despite himself. Even now, 12 years later, the loss felt raw as an open wound. "She never knew about who I was before." Detective Santos looked up from the file. "Who were you before, Mr. Vasquez?" The question hung in the recycled air between them. Arnold took another sip of coffee, buying time, remembering Maria Elena's laugh when she caught him talking to the tropical fish in their bedroom aquarium. She'd called it his meditation, watching those bright angelfish drift through their glass world. She'd never known he'd named them after the villages he'd burned. "Construction worker," he said. "Mostly residential. Nothing special. In El Salvador?" "Yes, during the Civil War." Arnold's hands went still around the coffee cup. Through the interrogation room's small window, he could see the Venice Beach pier in the distance, its neon lights bleeding color into the Pacific darkness. Somewhere out there was his shop, Elena's Surf and Sun, named after the only person who'd ever made him believe he could be someone different. "I came to America for work," he said, "like a lot of people." Detective Santos pulled out another photograph, sliding it across the table. Arnold's breath stopped. It was Carmen Restrepo's pendant, but not from tonight's crime scene. This was an old photograph, black and white, showing the pendant around a little girl's neck as she smiled at the camera. Behind her was a church, its white walls bright in the Salvadoran sun. "Beautiful piece," Detective Santos said. "Family heirloom, probably. The kind of thing that gets passed down through generations." Arnold forced himself to look at the photo, to meet the dead girl's eyes one more time. Carmen had been wearing a yellow dress that day, her hair in braids. She'd been holding her mother's hand when the trucks arrived. "I've never seen it before tonight," he said. "Of course not." Detective Santos slid the photo back into the folder. "The thing about family heirlooms, though, is they carry stories. This pendant? It belonged to a 7-year-old girl named Carmen Restrepo. She lived in a village called San Miguel de los Santos, about 60 kilometers outside San Salvador." The name of the village hit Arnold like a physical blow. He kept his expression neutral, but his heart was hammering against his ribs. San Miguel de los Santos had been his first assignment as a death squad commander. his initiation into a darkness he'd thought he'd escaped. The village was destroyed in 1993, Detective Santos continued, her voice soft as silk over steel. Burned to the ground. 43 people killed, including 14 children. Carmen was one of them. Arnold thought about the angelfish in his bedroom aquarium, how Maria Elena used to find him staring at them for hours. She'd thought he was finding peace. She'd never known he was counting the dead. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, "but I don't understand what this has to do with tonight." Detective Santos smiled, and for the first time, Arnold saw something predatory behind her careful professionalism. 3 gang members walk into your shop with a gun from the Salvadoran military and a pendant from a massacred village. They try to rob you, and you kill all 3 with techniques most civilians have never heard of. She leaned forward. That's a lot of coincidences, don't you think? The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the building, a phone was ringing. Arnold thought about his empty apartment, about the angelfish that needed feeding, about the surf shop that was all he had left of the life Maria Elena had helped him build. The hunt had found him, just as he'd always known it would. Arnold met Detective Santos's predatory smile with steady eyes, but inside, something was crumbling. 30 years of careful construction, the quiet shop owner, the grieving widower, the man who sold surfboards and fed angelfish, all of it dissolving under her relentless gaze. "I think," he said slowly, "that you should either charge me or let me go." Detective Santos laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Oh, we're just getting started." She reached into her folder again, this time pulling out a manila envelope sealed with evidence tape. "Before we go any further, there's something else you need to see." She broke the seal with deliberate care and withdrew a letter, aged paper, water-stained around the edges, written in Spanish in a child's careful handwriting. The sight of it made Arnold's mouth go dry. "This was found in the first victim's pocket," she said, sliding it across the table. "His name was Miguel Santos, by the way. 19 years old, born in Los Angeles, but his grandmother used to tell him stories about the old country." Arnold's hands trembled as he reached for the letter. The paper felt fragile between his fingers, like it might crumble at his touch. The Spanish words blurred for a moment before his eyes adjusted, and then he was reading a ghost's voice. "Papa, if you are reading this, it means you are still alive and they have found you. My name is Carmen Restrepo and I am 7 years old. Today is my birthday. Mama made me a cake with coconut, and Abuela gave me her pendant, the one with the silver cross." "That's impossible," Arnold whispered. "She's dead. I saw her." The words died in his throat. Detective Santos was watching him with those dark eyes, cataloging every micro-expression, every tell. He'd just confessed to being there, to seeing Carmen Restrepo die. "Go on," she said softly. "Read the rest." Arnold's hands were shaking now. The letter continued in that same careful script. "The men came today with their guns and their trucks. They made us stand against the church wall. I am scared, Papa. I can see one of their leaders watching us. He has kind eyes, but his hands are covered in blood. Mama says I should pray, but I am writing this instead because I want you to know that I forgave him before he killed me. I forgave him because hate is what made the war. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Find him, Papa. Find the man with kind eyes and bloody hands. Make him remember our names. Make him remember that we were people, not just bodies in the dirt. I love you. Tell Mama I was brave. Carmen." The letter fluttered from Arnold's nerveless fingers. The interrogation room felt like it was spinning, the fluorescent lights too bright, the walls closing in. He could taste copper in his mouth, fear or memory, he couldn't tell which. "Carmen Restrepo died on October 15, 1993, Detective Santos said, her voice now stripped of all pretense. "She was shot in the head by a death squad commander named Capitan Ernesto Morales. That was your real name, wasn't it?" Arnold stared at the letter on the table between them, the impossible letter from a dead child. This isn't real. She couldn't have written this. They were lined up, executed immediately. There was no time. No time for what? Detective Santos leaned forward. No time for a scared little girl to scribble a letter while your men were setting up? No time for her to hide it in her dress before you murdered her? The room was silent except for the buzzing lights and Arnold's ragged breathing. 30 years collapsed into nothing. He was back in San Miguel de los Santos, feeling the October sun on his neck and the weight of his service pistol. He could see Carmen Restrepo's face, the way she'd looked at him, not with hate, but with something worse, understanding. The letter was preserved, Detective Santos continued relentlessly. Kept in a chapel in San Salvador for 30 years. Carmen's father spent his life savings to bring his family's remains to Los Angeles, to bring them closer to you. How? The word came out as a croak. How did they know I was here? Detective Santos smiled again, and this time Arnold saw something familiar in the expression, something that made his blood turn to ice. Because Capitan Morales, she said, pulling out one final photograph, a man and woman at their wedding, the woman young and radiant, the man in military dress uniform. Carmen Restrepo was my half-sister. Her father, who spent 30 years hunting you, was also my father. Arnold stared at the wedding photo. The man in uniform was older, grayer, but unmistakable. Commander Ricardo Santos, his commanding officer in El Salvador. The man who'd given the orders for San Miguel de los Santos. The man who'd trained him to kill. "Welcome home, Capitan," Detective Santos whispered. "We've been waiting for you." The photograph slipped from Arnold's fingers, floating to the table like a falling leaf. Commander Ricardo Santos stared up at him from the glossy paper. Older in the wedding photo than Arnold remembered, but wearing the same cold smile that had haunted 30 years of nightmares. "No." Arnold's voice came out strangled. "Ricardo died in '94. Helicopter crash outside Tegucigalpa. That's what the report said." Detective Santos, Maria Santos, Ricardo's daughter, carefully placed the photograph back in her folder. Amazing what a few $1,000s and some burned wreckage can accomplish. My father was always good at disappearing when things got complicated. Arnold's mind raced, trying to process the impossibility of it all. Ricardo Santos had been the architect of San Miguel de los Santos, the man who'd handed him the orders, who'd stood back and watched as Arnold organized the executions, who'd clapped him on the shoulder afterward and said, "Clean work, Capitan. You're learning." "This is insane," Arnold said, pushing back from the table. "You're LAPD. You can't just—" "Can't what? Investigate a triple homicide?" Maria's voice was silk wrapped around razor wire. "3 young men died tonight, Mr. Vasquez. Or do you prefer Capitan Morales? I want to understand what happened." Arnold stood abruptly, the metal chair scraping against concrete. The room felt smaller now, the walls pressing in. Through the small window, Venice Beach looked impossibly far away. Another world where he sold surfboards and fed angelfish and pretended his hands had never learned to kill. "I want a lawyer." "Of course you do." Maria didn't move from her chair, "but we both know lawyers won't help with what's coming. My father spent 3 decades planning this moment." "You think he'd let something like due process get in his way?" The words hit Arnold like ice water. He'd been so focused on the immediate threat, the pendant, the gun, the impossible letter, that he'd missed the larger picture. This wasn't an investigation. It was an execution disguised as justice. "Where is he?" Arnold's voice was barely a whisper. "Where's Ricardo?" Maria smiled, and Arnold saw her father's cruelty reflected in her dark eyes. "Close. He wanted to be here for the reunion, but he's getting old. Bad heart. The years haven't been as kind to him as they've been to you." Arnold thought about his empty apartment, about the quiet life he'd built selling beach gear to tourists. Kind years. If she only knew about the nightmares, about the way he still checked locks twice before sleeping, about how Maria Elena had held him through panic attacks he could never explain. "The boys tonight," he said. "Miguel Santos, he was my nephew. My sister Carmen's cousin, actually. The family stayed close after the massacre. Miguel grew up hearing stories about the man who killed his relatives, about Capitan Morales, who disappeared like smoke after the war ended." Arnold's legs felt weak. He gripped the edge of the table, remembering 19-year-old Miguel Santos sprawled on his shop floor, neck twisted, eyes staring at nothing. Another child dead by his hands, the cycle continuing despite everything he'd tried to become. "You sent them to die," he said. "I sent them to test you." Maria's voice was clinical now, detached, to see if the killer was still there under all that suburban respectability. Turns out it was. 30 years of selling surfboards, and you still move like death. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the building, voices echoed down empty hallways. Arnold thought about calling his lawyer, about demanding his rights, about all the normal things an innocent man would do. But he wasn't innocent, and they both knew it. What do you want? Maria finally stood, moving with her father's predatory grace. Justice, the kind that doesn't come from courtrooms. I've tried to make amends. I've lived quietly. You've hidden. Her voice cracked like a whip. You've fed your fish and sold your surfboards and pretended 43 people didn't die screaming your name. That's not redemption, Capitan. That's cowardice. Arnold closed his eyes, seeing Carmen Restrepo's face again. The understanding in her 7-year-old eyes as she stood against the church wall, the yellow dress, the silver pendant catching the October sun. When he opened them, Maria was standing by the door, her hand on the handle. The investigation will take time, she said. Forensics, witness statements, paperwork. You're free to go for now. But don't leave Los Angeles, Mr. Vasquez. My father wants to see you again. And if I run? Maria's smile was winter itself. Then the hunt begins all over again, and next time, it won't be 3 teenagers with a stolen gun. She opened the door, letting in the sounds of the busy police station. Phones ringing, voices calling, the machinery of justice grinding on. Arnold remained frozen at the table, staring at Carmen's letter, at the impossible words from a dead child. Outside, Venice Beach waited in the darkness. His shop, his apartment. His carefully constructed life, now crumbling like sand castles before the tide. The hunt had found him at last. Arnold sat alone in the interrogation room for another 20 minutes, Carmen's letter burning like acid on the table before him. When a uniformed officer finally came to escort him out, the words still echoed in his mind. Make him remember our names. The police station buzzed with late-night activity. Drunks being processed, paperwork shuffling, the endless machinery of urban crime grinding forward. Arnold moved through it like a sleepwalker, his body functioning while his mind remained trapped in that moment 30 years ago when a 7-year-old girl had looked into his eyes and somehow seen his soul. Outside, the October air carried the salt tang of the Pacific, and something else, the smell of his burning life. His truck was still parked where he'd left it after the shooting, crime scene tape fluttering around his shop like yellow prayers in the wind. The neon signs of Venice Beach cast everything in sickly colors, turning the familiar boardwalk into something alien and threatening. Arnold drove home on autopilot, his hands steady on the wheel despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. The apartment building was quiet, most residents asleep behind their locked doors. Safe people living safe lives, unaware that a ghost from El Salvador was climbing the stairs to the 3rd floor. His key stuck in the lock. His hands were shaking after all. Inside, the apartment felt smaller than when he'd left it that morning. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Maria Elena's picture on the mantel, the stack of surf magazines on the coffee table, the aquarium humming quietly in the corner of the bedroom. But now it all felt like a museum exhibit. The Peaceful Life of Arnold Vasquez, 1995 to 2023. Note the careful attention to normalcy. Arnold stood before the aquarium, watching his angelfish drift through their glass world. 37 fish in total. He'd counted them obsessively over the years, adding 1 for each person who'd died at San Miguel de los Santos. 37 bright tropical fish to commemorate 37 dark souls. He'd lied to himself for so long about it being coincidence. The smallest angelfish, a yellow one he'd named Carmen, swam to the front of the tank when she saw him. Maria Elena had always said the fish recognized him, that they felt safe when he was near. She'd found it endearing, this gentle man who spoke softly to creatures that couldn't speak back. Arnold pressed his palm against the glass. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and for a moment wasn't sure if he was talking to the fish or to the ghosts. His phone rang, shattering the quiet. Unknown number. Arnold stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Capitan." The voice was older now, roughened by cigarettes and years, but unmistakable. Commander Ricardo Santos, calling from whatever hole he'd been hiding in for 3 decades. Arnold sank into his armchair, the phone feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. "Ricardo, you sound tired, my friend." It's been a long night, hasn't it? Through his apartment window, Arnold could see the lights of Santa Monica in the distance. Normal people living normal lives, going to bed without blood on their hands or ghosts in their dreams. He'd wanted so desperately to be one of them. "Where are you?" Arnold asked. Ricardo's laugh was the same predatory chuckle from their army days. Close enough to watch, far enough to stay safe. "You always were quick with your hands, Ernesto. Those boys never had a chance. They were just kids." So was Carmen. So were all of them. The humor drained from Ricardo's voice, leaving something colder behind. "Do you remember what you said to me after San Miguel de los Santos? You said it was necessary. You said they would have grown up to be guerrillas anyway." Arnold closed his eyes. He'd been 28 then, still believing in the cause, still convinced that violence could carve out peace if applied with enough precision. The young man who'd said those words felt like a stranger now. Someone he'd murdered as surely as he'd killed Carmen Restrepo. "I was wrong," Arnold said. "Yes, you were. But wrong doesn't bring back the dead, does it? Wrong doesn't give Carmen Restrepo her 8th birthday, or her first communion, or her wedding day." The yellow angelfish had pressed herself against the glass, as if sensing Arnold's distress. He watched her fins flutter in the artificial current and remembered Carmen's yellow dress, how it had looked like a bright flower against the white church wall. "Maria said you want to see me." "Oh, Ernesto. This isn't about what I want anymore. This is about what the dead want. And they want you to remember. I never forgot. Not for a single day." "No?" Ricardo's voice turned mocking. "Then why did you give yourself a new name? Why did you build this little life, this pretense of peace? You didn't remember, you buried them. You fed your guilt to those fish and told yourself it was penance." Arnold's free hand clenched into a fist. The worst part was that Ricardo was right. Every angelfish had been an act of selfish absolution, a way to carry the dead without truly honoring them. "The letter," Arnold said. "Carmen's letter. How is it possible? You'd be surprised what survives when people refuse to let the dead stay buried. Carmen's aunt found that letter in her dress pocket when they were preparing the body. She kept it for 30 years, waiting for the right moment. And you orchestrated all this. The pendant, the gun, everything. Justice rarely comes by accident, my friend. Sometimes it needs a gentle push." The line went quiet, except for Ricardo's labored breathing. His daughter was right. The years hadn't been kind to the old commander. Arnold found himself hoping they'd been painful. "This doesn't end with me," Arnold said finally. "No," Ricardo agreed. "It ends with remembering. All of it. Every name, every face, every choice that brought us here." The connection died, leaving Arnold alone with the humming aquarium and 37 fish who had no idea they were monuments to the dead. Outside his window, Venice Beach slept on, unaware that the past had finally caught up to the present and that some hunts never truly end. They just wait for the right moment to begin again. Arnold set his phone on the side table, the silence after Ricardo's call more deafening than any explosion. The yellow angelfish still pressed against the glass, her fins moving in slow hypnotic waves. For 30 years he'd told himself he was protecting something. Protecting Arnold Vasquez, the surf shop owner, the quiet man who fed fish and fixed broken board fins. But sitting in his apartment with the ghosts closing in, he finally understood the truth. He'd been protecting Ernesto Morales. The killer. The man who'd lined up children against a church wall and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Arnold stood and walked to the bedroom closet, pushing aside surf gear and winter coats until his fingers found the loose board in the back wall. Behind it, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay his service pistol from El Salvador, a Colt, .45 he'd smuggled across 3 borders and never had the courage to throw away. The weight of it in his hands felt like coming home and falling into hell simultaneously. "You kept it." Arnold spun around, the gun rising instinctively before his conscious mind caught up. Maria Santos stood in his bedroom doorway, her LAPD badge hanging from her belt, her own service weapon holstered but visible. "Door was unlocked," she said, though Arnold knew he'd locked it. Ricardo had taught them both to pick locks in the old days. Some lessons lasted forever. "You're not supposed to be here," Arnold said, not lowering the gun. "No warrant, no backup. This isn't procedure." "Procedure?" Maria laughed, and the sound carried her father's cruelty. "You think any of this is about procedure? You think I became a cop to follow rules?" She stepped into the room, fearless, despite facing an armed man who'd killed 3 people 6 hours ago. The yellow angelfish darted away from the glass as shadows fell across the tank. "I became a cop to find you," Maria continued. 20 years on the force, working my way up, building credibility, waiting for the right moment. Did you know I requested the Venice beach assignment? Did you know I've been watching your little shop for 3 months, learning your routines, your habits, your careful little life? The revelation hit Arnold like a physical blow. Every interaction with LAPD for the past 3 months, the noise complaint from his upstairs neighbor, the permit renewal for his shop, the community policing meeting he'd attended, Maria had been there, cataloging, planning, preparing. "The noise complaint," he said. "You were the responding officer. Very good. You seemed so concerned about being a good neighbor, so worried about following the rules. It was almost touching how desperately you wanted to be normal." Arnold's grip tightened on the pistol. "Your father trained us both. You know what I'm capable of." "I know what you were capable of. But that was a long time ago, wasn't it, Arnold?" She said, his assumed name like a curse. 30 years of selling surfboards and feeding fish. 30 years of Maria Elena holding you when you had nightmares, telling you that you were a good man, that whatever happened before didn't matter. The mention of Maria Elena's name on this woman's lips felt like blasphemy. Arnold could see his dead wife's photograph from where he stood, her smile frozen in time, unaware that the man she'd loved was a killer. "Never knew, did she?" Maria pressed. "Poor Maria Elena, married to a ghost. Did you ever tell her why you screamed in your sleep? Did you ever explain why you couldn't have children, why you were so afraid of bringing new life into the world?" "Stop." The word came out hoarse. Or was it easier to let her believe you were just a damaged refugee, the tragic victim of war instead of its architect? Arnold raised the gun higher, aiming at Maria's chest. At this range, he couldn't miss. One squeeze of the trigger, and Ricardo's daughter would join the growing list of bodies he'd left behind. But Maria didn't flinch, didn't reach for her own weapon. She just smiled. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Prove to me that Capitan Morales is still in there. Show me that 30 years of pretending to be human was just an elaborate lie." Arnold's finger caressed the trigger. The weight of the pistol felt familiar, comfortable. Muscle memory from 1,000 training sessions, whispered instructions: breathe out slowly, squeeze gently, follow through. Simple mechanics of death. But his hand was shaking. "You can't do it, can you?" Maria's voice held wonder and disgust in equal measure. "The great Capitan Morales, reduced to feeding fish and selling beach toys. My father was wrong about you. He thought the killer was still there, buried under all that suburban guilt. But you really did become Arnold Vasquez, didn't you? You murdered Ernesto Morales as surely as you murdered those children." The gun wavered in Arnold's grip. In the aquarium, 37 fish swam in their endless circles, unknowing monuments to the dead. The yellow angelfish he'd named Carmen pressed against the glass again, watching with dark, accusing eyes that looked exactly like a 7-year-old girl in a yellow dress. "The past doesn't die just because you change your name," Maria said, "and neither do we." The gun trembled in Arnold's hands like a living thing. 30 years of careful reconstruction. Arnold Vasquez, the gentle shopkeeper, the man who wouldn't hurt a fly, dissolved in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Maria Santos stood before him, unarmed and unafraid, waiting for him to prove what they both already knew: Capitan Morales was dead, and only the hollow shell of his crimes remained. "You want to know the real tragedy?" Maria's voice was conversational now, almost gentle. "My father spent 20 years believing you were still the monster. He had nightmares about you living free while Carmen rotted in the ground." "But you're not free, are you? You're just as dead as she is." Arnold's finger loosened on the trigger. The truth of her words carved through him like shrapnel. Freedom implied choice, implied the possibility of redemption. What he'd built wasn't freedom. It was an elaborate prison, and he'd been both the warden and the condemned. "Tell me about her," Maria said. "Tell me about Maria Elena." Don't the word came out strangled. She must have been special to make a killer forget how to kill. 23 years of marriage, wasn't it? Did she ever suspect? When you woke up screaming, when you counted fish obsessively, when you flinched every time a child laughed, did she ever wonder who she'd really married? Arnold lowered the gun slightly, his vision blurring. Maria Elena's face floated before him, not the frozen photograph on the mantel, but the living woman. The way she'd looked at him across their breakfast table every morning for over 2 decades, seeing something worthy of love in a man who'd forgotten how to love himself. "She knew I was damaged," he whispered. "She thought it was the war, the general trauma of it. I never told her about San Miguel de los Santos, but she helped you build this lie, this careful little life where Arnold Vasquez existed and Ernesto Morales didn't. It wasn't a lie." The protest came out weaker than he'd intended. "No?" Maria tilted her head. "Then why are you holding that gun like you remember exactly how to use it? Why did those 3 boys tonight die so efficiently? 30 years of peace, and you still move like death." Arnold's grip shifted on the pistol, a minute adjustment that brought the sights back into perfect alignment with Maria's heart. The motion was unconscious, trained into his muscle memory by countless hours on shooting ranges in El Salvador. She was right. The techniques were still there, waiting beneath the surface like landmines in an abandoned battlefield. "My father had a theory," Maria continued, stepping closer despite the weapon aimed at her chest. "He believed guilt couldn't change a man's fundamental nature. That underneath all your fish and surfboards, you were still the same man who'd executed children without hesitation. But I've been watching you for months, Arnold. I've seen how you interact with tourists' kids, how you cross the street when you see families playing on the beach. You're not hiding your nature, you're terrified of it." The yellow angelfish darted across the tank, her movement catching Arnold's peripheral vision. For a split second, she looked like a child in a yellow dress, running for cover that would never come. "The boys tonight," Arnold said. "Miguel, Carlos, David, you sent them knowing they would die. I sent them knowing you would have to choose between Arnold Vasquez, who would have hidden behind the counter and called for help, and Capitan Morales, who would have done exactly what you did." Maria's eyes glittered in the aquarium light. The choice made itself, didn't it? Arnold's hand began to shake again. She was dissecting him with surgical precision, laying bare 30 years of careful self-deception. The teenagers tonight hadn't died because Capitan Morales had emerged from his grave. They'd died because Arnold Vasquez had never truly existed at all. "My father wants to see you," Maria said. "Tomorrow night, the old pier at midnight. He has something for you, something he's been saving for 30 years. And if I don't come, then this ends differently, messily, with more bodies." Her smile held winter. "But we both know you'll come, because despite everything, you still believe you can make amends. You still think there's some path to redemption that doesn't run through the truth." She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "The truth is simple, Arnold. You can't save the dead by pretending to be someone else. Carmen Restrepo doesn't want your fish, or your guilt, or your carefully constructed penance. She wants you to remember her name and mean it when you say it." The apartment door closed with a soft click, leaving Arnold alone with his gun and his fish and the weight of 37 names he'd carried like stones for 3 decades. Outside, Venice Beach settled into the small hours of the morning, while inside, a dead man prepared for his final resurrection. Arnold stood frozen until Maria's footsteps faded down the hallway, the gun still heavy in his hands. The apartment felt different now, not like a sanctuary, but like a stage where 30 years of lies had finally been stripped away. He set the pistol on the dresser and walked back to the aquarium, where 37 fish continued their endless circles, oblivious to the weight of memory they carried. He didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Instead, he sat in his chair through the long hours until dawn, watching the yellow angelfish and remembering Carmen Restrepo's actual face, not the sanitized version his guilt had constructed over the decades, but the real child. 7 years old, clutching a small wooden cross, trying to be brave as soldiers lined her against the church wall with her father and brothers. When the sun finally rose over Venice Beach, Arnold made his decision. The pier stretched into darkness like a bridge to nowhere. Arnold arrived early, his service pistol tucked into his waistband beneath a loose jacket. The tourists and fishermen had long since departed, leaving only the sound of waves against barnacle-crusted pilings and the distant hum of late-night traffic on the PCH. Ricardo Santos emerged from the shadows at exactly midnight, walking with a pronounced limp that spoke of hard years and harder choices. He looked older than his 63 years, weathered by decades of exile and the particular kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too much history. In his hands, he held a small wooden box. Ernesto Ricardo's voice carried across the salt air. "You came. I came to end this." Arnold's hand rested on his concealed weapon. "Whatever game you and your daughter are playing, it stops tonight." Ricardo smiled, the same predatory expression Arnold remembered from their army days. "Still giving orders, I see. Some habits die hard, unlike children." The words hung between them like a blade. Ricardo's smile faltered, replaced by something raw. "Yes, unlike children." They stood 20 feet apart, two old soldiers on a moonlit pier, the weight of San Miguel de los Santos settling around them like fog. Arnold could see Maria in the distance, leaning against a lamppost, her badge glinting in the yellow light. "She orchestrated everything," Arnold said. "The boys, the investigation, all of it. My daughter is remarkably gifted at long-term planning. 20 years on the force, building a reputation, waiting for the perfect moment." Ricardo's voice carried paternal pride tinged with something darker. "She could have simply shot you, a police officer defending herself against a known killer. Who would question it? But she wanted you to understand first, to remember." Ricardo opened the wooden box, revealing a child's belongings, a small cross, a few colored pencils, a letter written in careful 7-year-old handwriting. Carmen Restrepo's final effects, preserved like relics. "Do you know what she wrote?" Ricardo asked. "In her last letter to God." Arnold's throat constricted. "I can't." "She asked God to forgive the soldiers. She asked him to help them understand that hurting people was wrong." Ricardo's voice cracked. 7 years old, about to die, and she was worried about our souls. The yellow angelfish had tried to hide when the shooting started. Arnold remembered suddenly. "Just like Carmen, just like all of them. I've lived with it every day," Arnold whispered, "every single day for 30 years. Living with it isn't the same as facing it." Ricardo closed the box with careful reverence. "You built a life around forgetting, around becoming someone else. But the dead don't want your guilt, Ernesto. They want justice. Then shoot me." Arnold spread his arms wide, exposing his chest to the moonlight. "End it. Give them their justice." "Oh, my friend, you still don't understand." Ricardo shook his head sadly. "This isn't about killing you. Death would be too easy, too clean. This is about truth." Maria stepped out of the shadows then, no longer the composed detective, but something raw, more fragmented. In her hands she held a digital recorder. "Confess," she said simply. "All of it. Every name, every face, every choice that led to San Miguel de los Santos. Give the dead their voices back." Arnold looked from Maria to Ricardo to the wooden box containing a child's final prayer for her killer's souls. The Pacific stretched endlessly before him, dark and forgiving, offering the same escape he'd contemplated 1,000 times over the past 3 decades. But Carmen Restrepo had asked God to forgive the soldiers, and Arnold finally understood what forgiveness actually required. "My name is Ernesto Morales," he said, his voice carrying across the water. "I was a captain in the Salvadoran Army's 4th Battalion. On March 15, 1992, I led a squad of 8 men into the village of San Miguel de los Santos." The recording device captured every word as Arnold spoke the truth at last, 37 names flowing from his lips like a river finally allowed to reach the sea. The dead had waited long enough. The confession took 43 minutes. 43 minutes to excavate 30 years of buried truth, each name spoken like a prayer and a curse combined. When Arnold finally fell silent, the pier felt emptied of more than words, as if something fundamental had shifted in the architecture of the night itself. Maria clicked off the recorder with steady hands. "Thank you," she said simply, and for the first time since this began, her voice held no trace of cruelty. Ricardo closed his eyes, swaying slightly as though the weight he'd carried for 3 decades had finally been lifted from his shoulders. When he opened them again, tears traced silver paths down weathered cheeks. "Carmen can rest now," he whispered. They all can. Arnold nodded, understanding that this moment had always been inevitable. Some debts could only be paid in truth, some wounds could only heal through the careful excavation of memory. He felt hollow but not empty, carved clean rather than destroyed. "What happens now?" he asked. Maria holstered the recorder with the same care she'd show a loaded weapon. "Now you disappear. Tonight, the recording goes to the International Criminal Court, to the families who survived, to the journalists who've been documenting war crimes for decades. But by the time it reaches them, Arnold Vasquez will have closed his shop and vanished. And if I stay?" Then tomorrow morning, LAPD receives an anonymous tip about a war criminal running a surf shop on Venice Beach. Your extradition hearing would be front-page news within a week. Her smile held no warmth. "I kept my word, Arnold. I gave you a choice." Ricardo stepped forward, offering the wooden box. "Carmen's things. I've carried them long enough." Arnold's hands shook as he accepted the box. Inside, beneath the child's belongings, lay a faded photograph, Carmen with her family before the massacre, grinning gap-toothed at the camera while her father's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. She looked exactly like the yellow angelfish, bright, curious, unaware that darkness was coming. "Keep it," Ricardo said. "Remember her as she was, not as you made her." The three of them stood in silence as waves crashed against the pier pilings below. Somewhere in the distance, Venice Beach carried on its endless carnival of humanity, oblivious to the reckoning taking place above the dark water. "I loved her, you know," Arnold said finally. "Maria Elena. That part wasn't performance." "I know," Maria replied. "She's the reason you couldn't pull the trigger tonight, the reason you became someone who feeds fish instead of killing people. In some ways, she saved you. Not enough to matter. Maybe, but enough to make this possible." Maria gestured at the recorder, at the confession that would echo through courtrooms and truth commissions for years to come. The man who executed Carmen couldn't have spoken her name with love. Arnold Vasquez could. Arnold understood. The 30 years hadn't been redemption. Redemption was impossible for what he'd done. But they'd been transformation, a slow alchemical process that had turned a killer into someone capable of bearing witness to his own crimes. Maria Elena had loved a lie, but she'd also created the man who could finally tell the truth. 3 days later, a small surf shop on Venice Beach went dark. The owner had left no forwarding address, no explanation to curious neighbors. Only a large aquarium remained, filled with tropical fish and a handwritten note, "Please care for them. They carry important names." The yellow angelfish was adopted by a local elementary school, where she lived in a tank labeled Carmen. Children pressed their faces to the glass daily, watching her dart through artificial coral with the same joy Carmen Restrepo had once brought to the village square of San Miguel de los Santos. Maria Santos requested a transfer to LAPD's Cold Case Division, where she spent her remaining years on the force helping other ghosts find their voices. She never married, never had children, but carried her father's stories to universities and human rights organizations, ensuring that the dead spoke louder than their killers. Ricardo returned to El Salvador for the first time in 30 years, carrying Ernesto Morales's recorded confession to the families, still waiting for answers. He died peacefully 2 years later, his final words a message for Carmen: "He remembered your name." And somewhere in the hills above Los Angeles, a man who had been many people sat beside Maria Elena's grave and spoke 37 names aloud each morning, keeping faith with the dead until his own name joined theirs. He'd learned, finally, that some ghosts don't haunt you to drive you mad, they haunt you to keep you human. The truth had changed nothing and everything. The dead remained dead, the past remained unchangeable. But in the space between confession and consequence, Arnold Vasquez had discovered what Capitan Morales never could, that remembering with love was the only forgiveness that mattered, and the only peace he'd ever been meant to find. The yellow angelfish swam on, carrying a child's name into the light.